Here's a problem that catches a lot of men off guard. You've spent years learning how to be more attractive, how to approach, how to hold a conversation, how to build tension, how to stop being invisible. All useful. And then it works. A woman is genuinely interested. The signals are unmistakable. She's making time for you. She's warm. She's clearly open. And you have absolutely no idea what to do next. So you do the only thing you know how to do. You keep running attraction. More teasing, more push and pull, more of whatever got you here. And the connection doesn't deepen. It plateaus. It stays fun and light and slightly superficial, and eventually one of you drifts. This is one of the most common failures in dating, and nobody talks about it, because the entire industry is built around getting a woman interested, and almost nothing is built around what happens after. So today we're covering that, how intimacy is actually built once attraction already exists. And I want to say up front, this runs on completely different mechanics. Attraction and intimacy are not the same process, and the moves that generate one will not generate the other. That's the whole reason men get stuck here. Let's start with the shift. Attraction is largely about being interesting. Intimacy is about being present. Attraction runs on tension, mystery, novelty, a certain charge. Intimacy runs on safety, disclosure, consistency, and being genuinely known. Those aren't opposites. A good relationship needs both. But the emphasis has to change once she's interested. If you're still doing pure attraction work at month 3, you're answering a question she stopped asking. She's already attracted. What she's now finding out is whether there's anything underneath it. So the first move is simply to notice that the task has changed. And I want to name why this trips up so many men. Because it isn't stupidity, it's a reasonable mistake. Everything you learned to get here was about standing out, being different from the other men, generating interest where none existed. That's a competitive frame. You against a field, trying to be selected. But once she's chosen you, the competition is over, and continuing to compete looks strange. You're still auditioning for a part you already have. The man who keeps demonstrating value after she's already convinced starts to seem like he doesn't believe her, like he can't accept that he's been chosen and needs to keep proving it. The new frame isn't competitive at all. It's collaborative. You're not trying to win her. You're both trying to find out whether there's something real here, and that's a question you answer together rather than one you perform your way through. That shift alone changes how a man carries himself in the room. He stops working and starts participating. And she feels the difference immediately, because being with a man who has relaxed into a connection is an entirely different experience to being with one who is still subtly trying. Now, the single most important principle in this entire video: intimacy cannot be extracted. It can only be invited. This is where men go wrong more than anywhere else. They approach closeness as something to obtain, ask the right questions, do the right things, and she'll open up. It becomes a project with a target. And a woman can feel the difference between a man who is interested in her and a man who is working on her. The moment closeness becomes something you're pursuing, she feels the pursuit, and pursuit creates pressure, and pressure closes people. What actually works is creating the conditions in which someone chooses to open, and then genuinely not requiring it. That distinction, creating conditions versus extracting outcomes, runs through everything I'm about to say. So let's build those conditions, starting with the foundation. Safety comes first. Nothing else works without it. Emotional intimacy requires a person to be exposed. Sharing something real means admitting it matters, and admitting something matters means becoming vulnerable to the response. Nobody does that with someone they aren't sure of. So the foundation isn't charm. It's whether she can predict you, rely on you, and be honest with you without it costing her something. Practically, that means 3 things. Consistency. You are the same man from week to week. Your warmth doesn't fluctuate based on what she's given you recently. You do what you say you'll do, small things especially, because trust is built out of the mundane rather than the memorable. Emotional steadiness. She can tell you something difficult, and you don't flare, sulk, get defensive, or go cold. This one is enormous, and I'll come back to it, because it's where most men quietly destroy their chances without noticing. Discretion. What she tells you stays with you. If she learns that something private became a story you told a friend, the door closes permanently, and rightly so. None of that is impressive. All of it is what makes anything else possible. And there's a reason safety has to come first rather than alongside everything else. A person deciding whether to open up is running a calculation, mostly beneath conscious awareness. If I show this, what happens? If the answer is genuinely unknown, the system stays closed. Not out of stubbornness, out of basic self-protection. You don't hand something fragile to someone whose reaction you can't predict. So every consistent, unremarkable thing you do is evidence in that calculation. You said you'd call, and you called. She was in a bad mood, and you didn't take it personally. She disagreed with you, and nothing bad happened. Each of those is a small data point telling her nervous system that opening here doesn't seem to cost anything, which means the boring reliability that men dismiss as unromantic is doing the actual work. It isn't the backdrop to intimacy, it's the mechanism. And it explains why men who are dramatic, intense, and inconsistent often generate enormous attraction and almost no genuine closeness. She can't settle. Her system never accumulates enough evidence to relax, so she stays partly guarded no matter how strong the feelings are. Intensity without predictability produces obsession, not intimacy, and those are very different things to live inside. Now let's talk about disclosure, because this is the actual mechanism of emotional intimacy. Closeness is built through a reciprocal ladder of self-revelation. One person shares something slightly more personal than the last thing. The other meets it with something of similar depth. Then the first goes slightly deeper still, step by step, both moving down together. That's how two people become genuinely known to each other, not through one grand conversation, but through a slow, alternating descent. And understanding it as a ladder solves most of the mistakes men make. Mistake 1, only asking, never sharing. He asks good questions, listens well, gets her talking about herself, and reveals almost nothing of his own. He thinks he's being a good listener. What she experiences is an interview. Eventually, she notices that she's told him a great deal and knows very little about him, and that asymmetry feels strange rather than intimate. She may even feel slightly exposed. Intimacy requires that you go down the ladder too. If she shares something real and you respond with a question instead of something of your own, you've taken a rung without giving one. Mistake 2, descending too fast. He shares something heavy far too early, believing depth creates closeness. It doesn't, not at that stage. It creates obligation. She now has to respond appropriately to something significant before there's any foundation to hold it, and the weight of that is uncomfortable. The same disclosure at the right moment is intimacy. Too early, it's a burden handed to someone who didn't sign up for it. Mistake 3, not descending at all. He stays permanently light. Everything is a joke, nothing lands anywhere real, and any moment that threatens to become serious gets deflected. That man is enjoyable and unreachable, and eventually she'll conclude there's nothing under the surface, or worse, that there is, and he won't let her near it. So the skill is pacing. Match her depth. Go slightly beyond it. Let her meet you there and continue. Don't sprint down and don't refuse to move. There's a practical way to read where you are on the ladder, and it's simply to notice what's already been shared. If the conversation has been about work, films, weekends, and general life, that's the top of the ladder. Going straight from there to something profound about your childhood is a jump, not a step. But if she's just told you something that clearly cost her a little to say, a disappointment, a worry, something she doesn't tell everyone, she's moved down a rung and left space beside her. That's the moment to meet her with something of comparable weight rather than retreating upward. Most men miss those moments entirely, and not through carelessness. They miss them because the moment feels intense, and their instinct is to relieve the intensity with a joke, with reassurance, with a change of subject. All three feel kind. All three decline the invitation. The correct response to someone opening slightly is to stay there with them, and then, when it's natural, to open slightly yourself. That's it. It isn't complicated. It just requires tolerating a moment that feels heavier than the usual register of the conversation. And when you get it right, you'll feel the shift. Something changes in the room, and both of you know the conversation has gone somewhere it hadn't been. Those moments are the actual building blocks. Everything else is scaffolding around them. And notice something about the pacing. It should mostly be led by whoever is more comfortable, alternating. If she just shared something meaningful, that's an invitation. Meet it. Don't retreat into humor, because the moment got intense, That's the exact instant men most commonly kill something that was opening. Which brings me to attention, and how rare real attention actually is. Most conversation is two people taking turns waiting. One person talks while the other constructs their reply. There's no genuine processing, just a cue, and it's felt, even if nobody names it. Real listening looks different, and it's identifiable. You ask follow-up questions that prove you actually absorbed the last answer. You go times deeper, times into a topic, rather than sideways into a new one. When she says something significant, you sit with it instead of immediately relating it back to yourself. That last one is worth emphasizing. The most common way men accidentally close a moment is by responding to something meaningful with their own version of it. She tells you about a difficult period, and you immediately describe your own. It feels like connection you're relating, but what actually happened is that the attention moved from her to you at precisely the moment she'd opened. Let it stay with her first. Ask another question. Let her finish. Then, later, share yours. And here's a simple test for whether you're really listening. Can you remember, 3 days later, the small details? Not the headlines, the small things. The name of her sister? The thing she's worried about at work. What she said she'd always wanted to do. If you can, you were paying attention. If you can't, you were waiting. The men who build intimacy easily aren't more charming. They just genuinely find the other person interesting, and that interest does all the work. And if you don't find her that interesting, that's information worth taking seriously rather than working around. A lot of men try to manufacture curiosity because they know they're supposed to be interested. They ask the questions they've been told to ask and listen to answers they don't really care about. It's felt, and it's slightly worse than not asking, because now there's a performance of interest sitting where interest should be. Real curiosity can't be generated on demand, but it can be found, if it's there, by asking about the right things. Most men ask about circumstances, what she does, where she's from, what she did at the weekend. Those are facts, and facts are rarely interesting. What's interesting is how a person thinks, why she made a particular choice, what she thought was going to happen, and what actually did, what she's changed her mind about, what she'd do if the obvious constraints weren't there. Ask about those, and you'll usually discover the person underneath the circumstances, and that person is almost always more interesting than the summary. If you go looking there and still find nothing that grips you, then this might simply not be the right connection, and that's fine. And better known early than discovered 2 years in. Now let's talk about vulnerability, because it's the most misunderstood word in this entire subject. Vulnerability is not the same as unloading. Unloading is telling someone everything difficult in your life because you need relief. It puts them in the position of caretaker, and it's fundamentally about you. Vulnerability is choosing to let someone see something real, at a moment when the connection can hold it, without requiring them to fix anything. The difference is in what you need back. If you share something and you need her to reassure you, comfort you, or resolve it, that's a request dressed as openness, and she'll feel the demand in it. If you share something and you're genuinely fine either way, that's vulnerability, and it does something powerful. It says, I trust you with this, and I'm not asking you to carry it. For men specifically, this is often the hardest part. A lot of men were raised to treat any admission of difficulty as weakness, so they either share nothing or, once they start, release far more than the situation can hold. The middle path is measured honesty, something real, sized to the moment, offered rather than dumped. And here's what most men underestimate. This is often the exact thing that makes a woman fall for a man, rather than merely enjoy him. A man who is strong and self-possessed times, and times occasionally lets her see something real, is offering a combination she rarely encounters. The strength is what makes the openness meaningful. Anyone can be vulnerable if they're vulnerable about everything constantly. It means something coming from a man who clearly isn't. Let me be concrete about what measured vulnerability actually sounds like, because be vulnerable is useless advice without examples. It isn't a confession, it's an admission, offered lightly and then left alone. Saying that something you're working on frightens you a bit, admitting you got something badly wrong once and what it cost you. Mentioning that a particular period was harder than you let on at the time. Telling her what you actually want out of your life rather than the version you'd give a stranger. Notice the common quality. Each of those is real, none of them requires a response, and all of them can be said in a sentence or two without the conversation turning into a therapy session. That's the register. You're not performing strength by revealing nothing, and you're not asking her to hold something heavy. You're simply letting her see a true thing about you, and then carrying on. And the timing matters as much as the content. The right moment is usually when things are already relaxed and slightly quiet, late in an evening, on a long walk, after something you've both enjoyed. Not in the middle of a fun conversation, and definitely not during any kind of tension. Depth offered in the wrong moment lands as a mood change rather than an opening. Get the register and the timing right. And this single practice will change your relationships more than any other thing in this video. Now, something that gets overlooked entirely. Shared experience builds intimacy faster than conversation does. Men default to conversation as the vehicle for closeness, better talks, deeper topics, more meaningful discussion. All good. But some of the strongest bonding happens sideways while you're doing something together. There are reasons for this. Side-by-side activity removes the intensity of constant face-to-face contact, which lets people relax and say things they wouldn't across a table. Novelty creates shared memory. Mild challenge or adversity, getting lost, something going wrong, having to solve something together, produces a sense of us that no conversation manufactures. And you get to see each other rather than hear descriptions of each other. How she handles frustration, how you handle it, who you both actually are when something doesn't go to plan. So build in real experiences rather than a rotation of drinks and dinners. Go somewhere neither of you has been. Do something slightly demanding. Take a long walk with no destination. Cook something together and let it go wrong. A single memorable afternoon does more than 4 evenings of good conversation, because now you have something shared that belongs only to the two of you. There's a second benefit that men underrate, and it's about how much easier honesty becomes when you're not staring at each other. Difficult or personal things are far easier to say side by side than face to face. Driving somewhere, walking, cooking, doing something with your hands, the reduced eye contact takes the pressure off, and people say things in those settings they'd never say across a table. This is worth knowing practically. If there's a conversation you sense needs to happen, or you want to give her room to talk about something real, don't engineer a formal sit-down. Suggest a long walk. The setting does half the work, and what would have felt like an interrogation becomes a conversation. And build a small history together deliberately. Inside jokes that came from something that actually happened. A place that means something because of a specific day. A running reference nobody else would understand. That accumulated private history is a large part of what makes a relationship feel like a relationship, rather than two people who get on well. And it can only be built by doing things, not by discussing them. Now let's cover physical intimacy, because it's part of this, and men frequently get the pacing wrong in both directions. The principle is the same as everything else. Escalate gradually, follow her response, and never require the next step. Physical closeness deepens connection genuinely. Warm, unhurried touch produces bonding, lowers stress, and creates a sense of safety that words don't reach. That's real, and it matters. But the sequence has to be right. Touch given for its own sake, affection with no agenda, no destination builds closeness. Touch that is clearly a step towards something else creates pressure, and she can tell the difference instantly. So the practical version. Let physical warmth be part of how you are with her generally, rather than something that only appears when you want something. A hand on her back, sitting close, a moment of contact that goes nowhere and was never meant to. And read her, continuously. If she moves closer, holds contact, reciprocates the pace, is right. If she stiffens or creates distance, ease back without comment or awkwardness and carry on enjoying her company. That responsiveness isn't a restriction on you. It's precisely what makes her able to relax, and relaxation is a prerequisite for everything else. One more thing here that men get wrong. Physical and emotional intimacy don't move at the same speed, and they don't have to. You can be physically close while the emotional door is still opening, or the reverse. Neither is a contradiction, and neither is a broken promise. Let each move at its own pace, rather than treating progress in one as a claim on the other. There's also a form of physical closeness that men consistently skip, and it may be the most bonding of all. Unhurried affection that isn't going anywhere. Sitting close while watching something. A hand resting on her back while you're doing something else. Holding her for a moment longer than the situation requires. A hand held while walking with no particular significance attached. None of it is dramatic. All of it registers, because most physical contact a woman receives from men is purposeful, a step in a sequence, a move towards something. Contact that has no destination is different, and she can tell the difference immediately. What it communicates is, I enjoy being close to you, full stop, not as a prelude. That's a rarer message than most men realize, and it does more for a sense of genuine closeness than the more obviously purposeful kind. So build that into how you are with her, particularly in ordinary moments. The affection given when nothing is happening and nothing is being angled toward is what makes the rest of it feel like intimacy rather than progression. Now what kills intimacy? This matters as much as anything above. Performing. The moment you're managing an impression, rather than being present, closeness stops. She can't get close to a performance, only to a person. And a man who is still performing at month 2 is a man she'll eventually find she doesn't actually know. Needing reassurance. Asking, directly or indirectly, whether she likes you, where this is going, whether you're doing well. Occasional honest questions about the relationship are fine and healthy. A constant low-level need for confirmation is corrosive because it makes her responsible for managing your security, and that responsibility is exhausting. Punishing honesty. She tells you something real, that something bothered her, that she's uncertain, that she feels something awkward, and you react badly. Defensive, cold, wounded, or sulking. You have now taught her that honesty with you has a cost. She'll be more careful next time. And a woman being careful with you is a woman withdrawing, one small concealment at a time. This is the single most important behavior in the whole video. Your ability to receive difficult information without flaring determines how deep this can ever go. Everything else is secondary to it. So let me give you the actual mechanics of doing it well, because don't get defensive is easy to say and hard to execute when something lands badly. Pause before you respond. The defensive reaction happens fast, usually within a second or two. If you can insert a breath before you say anything, you've already avoided most of the damage. The urge to correct the record will still be there. It just won't be driving. Understand before you answer. Ask what she means. Get the actual shape of it before you respond to the version you assumed. Half of all defensive arguments are men reacting to something that wasn't said. Acknowledge the part that's true. There's almost always something. Starting with that, genuinely, rather than tactically, does more to diffuse a moment than any amount of explanation. Don't confuse acknowledging with capitulating. You can take her point seriously and still hold your position. I can see why that landed badly, and I still think I was right to do it, is a completely legitimate sentence. Assertive isn't the same as agreeable, and don't make her manage your reaction. If it stung, that's allowed you're a person. But there's a difference between feeling something and making her responsible for it. The moment she has to comfort you about her own honest feedback, she's learned not to give it again. Get this one right, and you'll have solved most of what damages relationships over time. Get it wrong, and everything else in this video eventually stops mattering, because she'll simply stop telling you things. Rushing. Pushing for definition, for commitment, for the future, before it has formed naturally. It signals anxiety, and anxiety is not a signal of safety. And it usually produces the opposite of what it's reaching for, because a woman who feels pushed toward a decision will either give a soft answer to relieve the pressure or pull back to get room to think. Neither is what you wanted, treating closeness as owed. This one is subtle and destructive. A man invests time, effort, attention, generosity, and starts to feel that a certain level of openness is now due to him. That entitlement leaks out as frustration or as sulking when she doesn't reciprocate on schedule. Nobody owes you their interior. It's given or it isn't. Fixing instead of listening. She tells you about a problem, and you immediately start solving it. Your instinct is genuinely helpful, and the effect is often the opposite, because she wasn't asking for a solution, she was letting you into something. Moving straight to fixing skips over the part where she was being heard, and it subtly reframes her experience as a problem to be processed rather than something to be shared. Ask whether she wants your thoughts, or simply stay with it first and offer solutions later if they're wanted. Going quiet when you're bothered. Withdrawing rather than saying what's wrong. It feels like keeping the peace, and it functions as punishment, because she can feel the change and now has to guess at the cause. Say the thing plainly and early, while it's small. Silence isn't restraint if she can feel it filling the room. So, let me pull this together into something you can actually use. She's interested. The task is no longer to attract her, it's to build something. Be the same man consistently, because reliability is the ground everything else stands on, and it's the one thing no amount of charm substitutes for. Move down the ladder together, share as well as ask, match her depth, go slightly beyond, and never sprint ahead or refuse to move. Pay real attention, the kind that remembers small details 3 days later, and resist the urge to redirect her moment back to yourself. Ask about how she thinks rather than what she does, because that's where the actual person lives. Be vulnerable in the measured sense, real things, sized to the moment, without needing her to carry them. Build shared experience, because doing things together creates a bond that conversation alone can't, and because a private history is what makes a relationship feel like one. Let physical closeness grow naturally, following her responses rather than a plan. And above all, receive difficult information well. If she can be honest with you without it costing her, she'll keep being honest with you, and that alone will take you further than everything else combined. And underneath all of it, hold the principle we started with. You are not extracting closeness. You are creating conditions and letting her choose. That distinction is what separates a man who builds real intimacy from a man who is always slightly frustrated that it isn't happening faster. Because here's the thing about intimacy that nobody tells you. It isn't a destination you reach and then hold. It's something two people keep building or stop building. The men who have deep, lasting relationships aren't the ones who crack some code early. They're the ones who kept showing up, kept paying attention, and kept being safe, to be honest with. Year after year. Get that right, and the rest of it looks after itself. And a final word on pace, because impatience is what ruins this for most men. There's no schedule. Some connections deepen quickly, and some take months, and the speed tells you very little about the eventual quality. Plenty of relationships that felt instantly intense turned out to have nothing underneath, and plenty that built slowly became the real thing. So stop measuring. The man who is constantly assessing how far along they are comparing it to previous relationships, worrying that it should be further by now, is a man who isn't actually present in any of it. And that monitoring is felt. What you should watch for isn't speed, it's direction. Is there more between you than there was a month ago? Has she let you slightly further in? Have you? If the answer is yes, it's working, however unhurried it looks. And if the answer is genuinely no, if months pass with no movement in either direction, despite your consistency, then that's real information, and it's fair to say plainly what you want and find out where you stand. Patience isn't the same as waiting indefinitely for something that isn't forming. But in the early stretch, when everything is still taking shape, the most useful thing you can do is stop trying to arrive somewhere and start enjoying where you actually are. Now, if this is something you actually want to get better at, rather than just an idea you agreed with, the difficult part isn't understanding it. It's catching yourself doing the opposite in real time, noticing that you just deflected a serious moment with a joke, or that you got a bit defensive when she said something honest. That's genuinely hard to see from inside your own head, which is why it helps to have other men around who are working on the same thing. That's what the Forge HQ is, the Discord for this channel. Post what actually happened in a conversation, and other men who've made the same mistakes will tell you what they're seeing. Links in the description. If you want to go deeper still, you can support the channel and get extra content by becoming a member. And if this landed, comment the 3 words, "Let it build," and I'll personally reply to you. This is Freedom Forge. See you in the next video.